Welcome to Texas Heart Institute, Living Legends and Luminaries in Endovascular Interventions. Our special guest today is Dr. William Cohn, and he's the Chief Medical Officer of Bivacor and also Obvious Robotics. He's also an Executive Director of the Center for Device Innovation at Texas Medical Center, and also tenured Professor of Surgery at Baylor College of Medicine and staff cardiothoracic surgeon at Texas Heart Institute. He earned his undergraduate degree in biology and chemistry from Oberlin College in Ohio and went to receive the Doctor of Medicine degree from Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, Texas. He completed 7 years of general surgery and cardiothoracic surgery training at Baylor College of Medicine, affiliated hospitals, and also 1 year cardiothoracic fellowship at Boston Beth Israel Hospital. After completing his training, Dr. Cohn also served as a staff cardiothoracic surgeon at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center and as a faculty member of the Harvard Medical School for 10 years before returning back to Houston, his hometown. Medical device development remains Dr. Cohn's major passion. He has been granted more than 200 U.S. patents or patents that are pending for his medical innovations and have provided the core technology for 6 venture-based medical startups. Dr. Cohn's numerous awards include Bacon Scientific Achievement Award from the Society of Thoracic Surgeons in 2023, also Honorary Doctorate in Science from Oberlin College, Distinguished Science Award by McDonald Fund, Edison Award for Excellence in Human-Centered Design and Innovations for Center Heart Lariat Device, and he's also Distinguished Inventor of the Year by the U.S. Intellectual Property Owners Association in 2000. He's also Outstanding Inventor of the Year by Houston IPO in 2023, and Innovation Award at ICI in Tel Aviv for inventing the TVA Everlink system, as many others that we don't have time to mention at the present time. Welcome, Dr. Cohn, to this Living Legends and Luminaries in Endovascular and Cardiovascular Medicine.
Well, thank you, Zvonko, and thanks for that great introduction. I did all that? Wow.
Right. And more. And we have yet to talk about it. So thank you for agreeing to come today for this special recording. And there are several questions, burning questions that I have to ask you related to your professional achievements. When was the first time when you began to think about becoming a physician? And what was the reason for that desire?
Yeah, that's a great question. And first of all, before I answer that, I want to say I am so honored and humbled to be interviewed in this capacity. I saw the list of the other people that you're interviewing, and it's high cotton, and I feel really honored to be included in that group. I'm not sure if it's justified, but I'll do my best to do a good interview. Growing up in Houston, Texas, I moved here when I was 18 months old, and as you no doubt know, Houston was sort of the epicenter of heart surgery. With Michael DeBakey and Denton Cooley, they were on the front page of the newspaper all the time. My mother would drive me down Fannin and say, that's where Dr. DeBakey works, that's where Dr. Cooley works. And so I grew up thinking of heart surgeons and astronauts as total rock stars. That in the 1960s, that's when the space program and NASA and Johnson Space Center was really starting to come into its own. And I remember on April 5th in 1969, I was 8 years old. That's the day after Denton Cooley famously implanted the artificial heart in a brave, brave man, Haskell Karp, while Dr. DeBakey was out of town, created a huge controversy and a big rift between these two great surgeons, but also on the front page of the Houston Chronicle and the Houston Post. And my mom cut it out, as she always did. I was 8 years old, and put it by my cereal bowl. She used to do that for the first aneurysm and the first. So I grew up really fantasizing about heart surgery. But that article I actually took to school with me and was telling everybody about it, and actually got in trouble for telling a girl in my class about it while the teacher was talking. And the teacher came and took the article from me and said, well, do you want to tell the class about this? So at 8 years old, I emerged from my peer group as the dominant voice in medicine and cardiovascular surgery.
So, needless to say, those two luminaries, Dr. DeBakey and Dr. Cooley, were the motivators for you to become a cardiothoracic surgeon.
No question. No question.
So, can you tell us a little bit further in your career? When was the first time when you started to think about research and innovations?
So I've always had a creative drive and entrepreneurial drive. When I was little, I would make things and I would iterate them and tweak them in our home, and then I would take them to school and try to sell them to my peers, other guys in elementary school and junior high. I remember for a while I was making bamboo blow guns that you could put spear grass in, that you could fire spear grass at your friends. I made little things out of Sanka coffee cups that had a parachute in them that you could throw up in the air and they would parachute down. And I would make these things. And so I was always inventive. The idea of inventing technology to help patients really struck me in medical school when I heard about the legendary Tom Fogarty and did some digging. This was way before the internet. But what I found out, I thought, what a cool path. And, of course, Michael DeBakey and Denton Cooley were amazing innovators. And so as I got over my initial fears about going to medical school, I mean, fearful that I wouldn't be able to do the classes or keep up with the workload. But then when I realized that was going to be pretty straightforward, I started thinking about innovation.
Interesting that you mentioned Tom Fogarty. As you know, he's one of the recipients of the Ray C. Fish Award in the early 90s at our institution here. But, Tom Fogarty also started in a totally different area of investigation, research, and so on.
Absolutely.
And so he invented the motorcycle clutch. So,
right. No, I know the whole story. Tom told he was actually working. His father had died when he was young, and Jack Cranley, a vascular surgeon, sort of adopted, in a way, Tom, even though I think he had 7 or 8 kids of his own, and actually put Tom through college, through Xavier College. But Tom was 15 or 16 and was working, just cleaning up in a machine shop, and his friend, I forget his friend's name, but he had
his buddy,
Cushman 55, which is a kind of mini bike that was really popular in World War II because they could parachute them down with the troops. And it had a manual clutch, and there's a lot of hills in Cincinnati. And when his friend, Bill somebody, would let go of the clutch, Tom would fall off the back of the motorcycle, and it had a tail light and a license plate, so it impacted him emotionally and physically. And so he came up with the idea of the centrifugal clutch. Since he was working for this machine shop, they had shop rights to any ideas that came there. So they got to make the clutch. They patented, but they put him as an inventor on the patent. And then not long after that, Honda came out with the QA50, a mini bike that had a centrifugal clutch. It stepped on all his patents, and they had a lawsuit. And that was Tom's first wildly successful commercial product.
But unfortunately, he didn't get anything for that patent.
Not as much as he should have, right?
Absolutely. Well, one interesting thing, since
wisdom. He got wisdom.
Yeah, wisdom. One interesting thing about Tom that a lot of people don't know, he was trained in vascular surgery in Portland at the time when Charlie Dotter was there,
right,
chief of radiology. And Charlie started with interventions, and Charlie started to use dilatation catheters, urinary catheters, right, exactly. And then eventually he figured out, well, we need a balloon to be able to achieve that goal, what he wanted to achieve with it. And he was frustrated with early experiments with the balloons and materials. So he asked Tom actually to work on it a little bit more extra, and this is how Tom Fogarty got an idea about his Fogarty catheter.
Right.
If there wouldn't have been Charlie Daughter, probably there wouldn't have been a Fogarty balloon, which is very interesting how those luminaries learn from each other and stand on the shoulders of those giants that came before them to get that goal. And I'm sure you're part of it as far as innovation is concerned.
Well, that whole Tom Fogarty story about the first balloon catheter, it was a ureteral catheter, and he took the finger of a glove, and he was a fly fisherman, so he knew how to tie with fine line. This was long before he'd ever done an operation. He was a medical student at the time, and he made the first balloon catheter to show to Jack Cranley. But that whole story is just a beautiful example of the process. You observe, you learn from others, so you're standing on their shoulders so you can see further because you're resting on the great people that have come before, and then make something simple, cheap, and fast to see if it's crazy or not. I give a talk about the power of kludgy prototypes, and Tom was a master at that, but that story, and 50 other stories from Tom Fogarty's playbook are just masterclass examples of how you innovate.
Exactly. Well, let's go a little bit more into your inventions and research, and a couple of them were absolutely fascinating and ingenious.
Thanks.
And one was the left atrial appendage occlusion, or so-called LARIAT device. Can you tell us a little bit about that particular project? How did it come about, and tell us how did it become really to fruition to be
Sure.
used clinically in practice?
It was great because at the BI there was a cardiologist, Warren Manning, and this was, it's hard to imagine, but there was a time before everybody realized the left atrial appendage was a real liability in patients with atrial fibrillation, and that's where the strokes were coming from. But there was starting to be increased awareness, and this is in the early 90s or mid 90s, and Warren Manning wrote some papers about it. And Dudley Johnson, famous heart surgeon, wrote a paper about the left atrial appendage being man's most lethal appendage.
I work with Dudley Johnson in Milwaukee, by the way.
Just an amazing guy, just a true pioneer. Right. And so we started finding patients at risk, and this is before the Watchman, even before the Plato device, Russell Hirsch's Plato device, but they would send them to me, and I would make a little mini thoracotomy, and with a camera and stuff, try to put a stapler across it. It was scary and hard, but we did a bunch of them, and then I thought, what about endo loops? Try to put an endo loop over it and tie it off videoscopically. But I mean, it was for the few and the daring, because this was long before we had robotics and good laparoscopic instruments. And so John Litticoat, who is a legend in med tech, this was before he married my little sister, who's now my brother-in-law, but he said, Billy, we have to make it so you can do it in the cath lab without opening the chest under x-ray. And in about a 48-hour period, I came up with the idea of a balloon with a magnet and another magnet and all that stuff.
And the Texas stuff like lasso.
Yeah, no, that's why we called it Lariat, because John's also a Texan. But I thought, well, describing this to people, they kind of go, I just don't get it or I can't see it. So I had to prototype it. And I did it with a Ziploc bag, a Fogarty balloon with a magnet attached to the end with heat shrink tubing from Radio Shack, and made the whole thing and extensively edited a video that made it look like it worked. And that allowed me to get a successful CEO to join me. We wrote a business plan. We raised money from U.S. venture partners. And then, 7 or 8 years later, did 8,000 cases and got through the FDA and did a PMA trial.
And the rest is history.
So, yeah, super exciting, though, how something can come from just a napkin sketch, a prototype hastily made out of stuff from the grocery store to get people to join your cause. And that's, people say, how many companies have you been the CEO of? And the answer is 0. I know that's not my skill set. My skill set as a cheerleader is to make the prototype, make the video, do the animal to compel a credible CEO to join me and write a credible business plan. And then we raise money and go arm in arm.
What is really fascinating is your knowledge and expertise in using magnets and super magnets to really achieve a goal of being able to approximate structures.
Sure.
Right. And this
Yeah.
is one of them.
Well, I've used that in Obvious. I use it in TVA. I use it in Lariat. So yeah, I'm very attracted to magnets, pun intended.
And this actually leads to the next invention, which is percutaneous creation of AV fistulas. Tell us a little bit about that idea. How did it originate?
Yeah.
And why do you think this would work better than the surgical access and repair?
Well, so Winston Churchill has a great quote. Men occasionally stumble over the truth, but most of them get up, brush themselves off, and head on like nothing's happened. And so every time something weird happens and you go, that's odd, there's probably an opportunity if you just sit in it for a little bit and start thinking about it. And I've got another great example of that I'll talk about in a second. But we had a young man who got stabbed in an altercation in a parking lot over a parking space. And he came to the emergency room, and I wasn't even a cardiac surgical resident yet. I was a general surgery resident, but came down to look at the patients in the ER, and this young man was holding a bloody towel, and I looked at the wound. It was small, it wasn't bleeding, there was no hematoma. He had good neurological function, good radial pulse, ulnar pulse, good Allen's test. And we said, well, you're lucky you didn't hit anything. Give him a tetanus shot and antibiotics. Don't get in any more knife fights. He said, no, sir, I won't. I said, come back in a month or sooner if you notice anything weird. Well, he didn't keep his appointment, but he did come back at 3 months and showed us his arm, and his veins were huge and had a palpable thrill in them. And of course, he had a traumatic AV fistula. The knife had gone through a vein and into the artery. He was bleeding into his vein, and Mother Nature healed it off as a perfect connection. And a lot of the people, dark humor said, too bad he's not on dialysis. Well, I looked in the big book of vascular surgery, and it says you have to take these patients to the operating room and close them off and repair them because they'll never close on their own. And I thought, well, that's weird. The AV fistulas I make on purpose with 7-O-proline in my magnified glasses close off about half the time. And I figured, well, it's because you're not taking the vasovasorum, there's no spasm, there's no edema. And so at that point, I didn't have an animal lab. I'd never done anything. The hospital sold the patent to a very well-known medtech innovator, and he built a big company trying to connect coronary arteries to coronary veins, and ultimately it didn't quite work, and they couldn't make it work, and so Medtronic bought the flaming wreckage of his company for about a third of the money invested in it at that point, and my patent sat there forever and ever. Well, I did my stabilizer, which was my first successful product, to Genzyme Surgical. We sold that, and Neck Stitch and a couple other things, and it started Viacor, and I said, you know what, that magnetic catheters for AV fistulas was a good idea. I spent a year licensing it out of Medtronic. It took a long time to do that. Hired Adam Berman, who's the CEO's CEO, just a brilliant guy, and made the technology, and lo and behold, it worked just like we thought it would. And we were able to sell that to Beck & Dickinson in 2019.
So basically, you introduce the magnets from the artery and the vein, and they connect, and then you, with radio frequency, create a fistula.
Exactly correct.
Exactly. So this behaves practically the same as traumatic fistula.
It is a
gunshot
traumatic
wound.
AV fistula. Exactly correct. And people said, well, what's going to keep them from bleeding everywhere? And I'd show them an X-ray of a patient who had an AV fistula after a catheter-based procedure where the sheath went through the artery and the vein. They go, yeah, but you got to find a place where the artery and vein are right next to each other. Well, we did anatomic casts of human arms, and there's lots of places to choose from. We picked the easiest one, went to Paraguay, started doing cases, and the data was incredibly compelling.
And this idea opened up an opportunity, actually, to use this application in different other scenarios, like critical limb ischemia in the lower extremity, right?
Yep, limb flow and PQ bypass, and
all of those things.
And other fast followers, ellipsis. I mean, it created a whole field, I think, catheter-based connection of blood vessels.
Absolutely amazing, ingenious.
Well, thank you very much.
So let's move forward to even bigger things. So you started working with LVADs or ventricular assist device long time ago and have plenty of experience. Tell us a little bit about that field
Yeah.
and indications. And is this still a bridge to transplant, or is it destination therapy at the present
Sure.
time, and so on?
Great question. So my fascination with that started again when I was 8 years old, when I heard about this artificial heart that.
And we'll talk more about total artificial heart, but
Okay, we're talking about LVADs now.
LVAD.
Okay. Well, so all through when I was a young boy, the Valentines I would make for my mom and dad on Valentine's Day had pictures of LVADs on them. Or,
Interesting.
yeah, I mean, goofy things that I made with bladders and ball valves, like Star Edwards valves. And I was just totally engaged with it and followed it my whole career. Now, at the Beth Israel Deaconess, we didn't have an LVAD program. We didn't have a transplant program, but the AB not the AB 5000, the BVS, the Abiomed BVS, the very first one,
Right.
the one you had to adjust the height of it to
Right.
optimize filling and ejection. That came out, and you didn't have to be a transplant center to use it. And I put the first one in Boston. And I was so proud. I always wanted to get into the LVAD game. In fact, I gave a talk at Grand Rounds in the BI Deaconess about where we were with LVADs. I hadn't met Bud Frazier yet. I knew who he was. He was an icon. I followed his work. Every talk he'd give at a meeting, I'd be in the back because it was standing room only, listening to what he was doing. Well, after that, I did my stabilizer, beating heart tool, and sold that to industry, and then a couple other products. And I started establishing myself as an innovator, and that got me on Bud Frazier's radar. And he said, Billy, you ought to come back to Houston, and help me with these blood pumps, these LVADs. And I just thought that would be the coolest thing. But we started having a lot of babies. My wife and I had 5 babies. The first one was born in Houston, but 4 more babies while we were in Boston. And moving a big family like that's challenging, but I was really lamenting that. I wanted to come and work on blood pumps with Bud Frazier.
Interesting.
And finally, it got critical mass, and in 2003, halfway through, I said, we're going to do it. My wife said, oh, no, we have to leave Boston. And she was from Houston, too. Her mom and dad still lived here in Houston. But we came back, and it was just to work on these pumps because there had been a paradigm shift that Bud Frazier had led. All the LVADs were pusher plates,
Right.
just like that heart from 1969 that they put in Haskell Carp. That's a great way to pump blood, but it's not durable, and they're big, and they're complex, and they're prone to strokes. And so no one had really figured that out. Bud, working with a group called TCI, Thermal Cardioelectron, that became Thoratec, that became Abbott, St. Jude, then became Abbott, had developed a pump where all the surfaces were rough and platelets stuck to them, so they got rid of the stroke problem, but not the durability problem. If it's pumping 100 times a minute, that's 52 million heartbeats a year. That's 1 million heartbeats a week. No man-made device can do that. You could keep a patient alive for a year and a half and transplant them if you found an organ, but if you didn't, the pump would break and they would die. And so Bud said there's got to be an easier way or a better way to pump blood, and he had embraced the idea of rapidly spinning pumps because he'd used pump heads to keep patients alive for a couple days that wouldn't come off cardiopulmonary bypass. And he said that's the future of blood pumps. And surgeons and cardiologists and scientists stood in line to slap him in the face and say, there's no way. You need a pulse. You can't have a rapidly spinning thing in the circulation. Well, we all know now that you totally can. And he embraced it with both Rob Jarvik, who had come up with a turbine left ventricular assist device, and Rich Wampler, who'd come up with the first percutaneous rapidly spinning
Right.
blood pump, the predecessor of the Impella, the Abiomed Impella.
Exactly.
Anyway, he started embracing them and showed the world that you could have rapidly spinning pumps, which gave rise to the Micromed, which Michael DeBakey worked on and
Right.
was located here in Houston, and the HeartMate 2. And the HeartMate 2 was the first and really only super successful blood pump in the United States. Heartware also, which was invented at Bud Frazier's desk. Anyway, I came down because that seemed so exciting to me and got here in July of 2003. In November of 2003, Bud Frazier and Igor Grigorik put in the first HeartMate 2 in the United States. Super exciting, and that became a dominant pump. And I was just super passionate about it and worked on in the lab on it and stuff. And now that pump is obsolete. And now the Heartware has been taken off the market, and the HeartMate 2 has been replaced with the HeartMate 3. And that device is here to stay. And originally people thought, well, it should be more durable. It turns out it's much more durable. There are 500 patients in the United States that have had a single HeartMate 2 for 15 years or more. There's one patient that's had one for 22, 23 years.
Amazing.
They last forever. So the idea of this is bridge to transplant, now people are saying, no, you don't have to be a transplant candidate. This can be destination. But there's still problems with LVADs, and that's the liability of leaving the big, baggy, sick heart just upstream. 13% of patients with a HeartMate 3 still have a stroke at 3 years. Right. It's not from the pump. The pump's brilliant.
The valve.
It's from the clot in the heart and the valves and the left atrial appendage.
The aortic valve doesn't open, right?
And the aortic valve doesn't open. You get clot there. And the right heart is a big problem. Everybody knows putting in left ventricular assist devices is all about managing right heart failure now. So strokes, GI bleeding, LVADs have saved tons of lives. It's a great leap forward, but they're not the final answer, and that's what we're working on now.
Okay, let's move now to a total artificial heart. And as we mentioned, you're chief medical officer of Bivacor, and actually this project basically started in here.
Absolutely.
In Houston, Texas Heart Institute. Tell us a little bit about that history. This didn't start yesterday, by the way.
No, it's an overnight success, 22 years in the making. Yeah. So Bud Frazier, while he was developing these turbines and showing these things really work, that was one of the things he said, Billy, why don't you come down to Houston and help me rethink the total artificial heart? And his concept was if we took two of these turbines, we could replace the heart. And the very first one we did was with a very early iteration of the HeartMate 3 that ultimately turned out not to be a good device. But we did 68 animals over an 8.5-year period where we'd take a cow, we'd open the cow's chest, go on cardiopulmonary bypass, cut the heart out, and then replace the heart with two turbines. And we had to home make the adapters, and I was doing it with stuff from Home Depot, with bath and tile caulk and drywall tape, and then Dacron from the fabric store. And many of these animals would be able to get up and walk on a treadmill. A couple of them went the whole 3 months. A very challenging prep. But based on that, we actually thought this is going to be much smaller than any of the other artificial hearts. And by the way, I should say, all the artificial hearts were derivatives of that first one from 1969. They got more sophisticated with the materials and the manufacturing, but they all had flexing bladders, flexing 100 times a minute, so 1,000,000 times a week. They all had 2 inlet valves and 2 outlet valves. They were big, they consumed tons of energy, and the durability was terrible. But that's 70 years of research, that's all there was, because nobody could figure out how to leverage these rapidly spinning things to make an artificial heart. That was Bud Frazier's brilliance, is let's just put 2 of them and have 2 controllers. We did 68 animals, and then famously or infamously, we put one in a human patient. Very brave man, Craig Lewis, 52-year-old engineer, had cardiac amyloid and hepatic amyloid and kidney amyloid. He was on dialysis. He was being kept alive with a tandem. He had arrested several times. We had nothing to offer him. And we approached him and said, can we try this new technology? He was intubated, but he could respond. And his wife said, he's an engineer, he would love this. And so in 2011, we cut out his heart and replaced it with our 2 turbines. We could do that because 6 months earlier, the HeartMate 2 became the first clinically approved turbine in the United States. And we knew we couldn't use drywall tape and bath and tile caulk and fabric from the fabric store. But we made it out of hernia mesh, which is approved for implantation. Maybe not exactly in that manner. And we used medical silicone from NuSil, the stuff that's approved for the EP doctors to put in the screw holes on AICDs. And we used Dacron cardiovascular patches from Cook. So everything And the two HeartMate 2s was approved for implantation. We made the world's first continuous flow twin turbine heart, put in exactly 2 cows, and the third implant was in this brave patient.
And what about Daniel Timms? Where does it come into
Yeah,
play?
so Daniel Timms, the most brilliant scientist I've ever met,
From Brisbane.
from Brisbane, Australia. His father was dying of heart failure while he was getting his PhD on a radically new concept, a rotating artificial heart, but instead of 2 turbines, it was one rotating disc with veins on both sides that was magnetically levitated, no bearings, and could adjust its position thousands of times a second to balance the left and right flow. And he'd burned through maybe $700,000 over a decade and had done some great animal studies, but had never done a successful implant and actually didn't even have an implantable pump. He had a box with a rotor and the motor was outside, but he had it all mapped out in his head.
His dad was a plumber, right?
His dad was a plumber, and he would go
played
to
with the
Bunnies.
toys like you did in childhood.
We're absolute kindred spirits. And so he had heard Bud Frazier talk about this. Everybody knew who Bud Frazier was, but he heard that we were interested in continuous flow artificial hearts. So on his own dime, he flew down to Houston. He had met Bud at a meeting in Paris, and Bud said, well, I want to come down and meet Billy. So he flew down to Houston. I had on the calendar to meet this interesting guy from Brisbane, 30 minutes. And about 5 or 6 hours into that 30-minute slot, I was saying, you're not leaving Houston. You're staying here, and we're going to make this thing together. And I said, where's your team? And he said, well, 2 of them are in Brisbane, one's in Auckland, I've got one in South America, another guy. They were all over the place. And he had been traveling from place to place, living on ramen noodles and sleeping on couches, getting this thing made. The Japanese scientists had developed the maglev system with him. I mean, it was, let's say, international effort. And he said, well, I can bring them all here for 18 months if we can come up with $2.5 million. And I knocked on exactly one door, Mattress Mac, Mac and Vale, Gallery Furniture. And Dan Cooley even said, Billy, he's not going to give you $2.5 million. I said, yeah, he is. And a week later, I went back there with Jim Willerson and Bud Frazier. The first visit, I went there by myself, and it was on the 2-yard line. I said, Daniel, where are you? He says, I'm in Japan. I said, get here quick. We've got a meeting Wednesday. We went in on that day. He presented with me. We got our check. We brought the team in, and that's really the day that Bivacor Inc. Was created.
So what is unique about Bivacor? Now there is Syncardia. There are other projects similar to this as far as the total artificial heart. But what is unique about Bivacor?
I mean, everything.
Everything.
Yeah. I mean, so if you know the history of heavier than air aviation, all the initial airplanes had flapping wings. The Wright brothers realized fixed wings and put air over them and make them so they have lift. No bird soars in a calm. That was the amazing observation. Well, this is the first airplane without flapping wings. The Cooley-DeBakey-Leota heart is really the DeBakey-Leota. Cooley changed out the valve, so he called it the Cooley-Leota heart. But that was the one implanted on April 4th in 1969. All the hearts that have come since are very derivative of that. They all have flexible membranes. They all have inlet and outlet valves. They all have a mechanism to squeeze the flexing membranes. That's the Symbion.
A lot of moving parts.
A lot of moving parts. Symbion, CardioWest, the Syncardia, the Abiacor, the Real Heart, the 3M Sarns, the Nimbus, the Real Heart out of Scandinavia. They all have flexing membranes, flexing bladders, inlet and outlet valves. They're all going to have bad durability. They all are going to be big and power hungry. That's not a very efficient way to pump blood. The Bivacor is the first device, first artificial heart, to have no valves, one moving part, a disc about the size of an Oreo cookie, with veins on one side that take the bright red blood returning from the lungs and send it out the aorta, and fingers on the other side that take the venous blood returning from the arms, legs, internal organs, and brain and pump it to the lungs. And that one moving part is suspended in an electromagnetic field that's adjusted by a computer several thousand times a second.
It's a maglev system.
Maglev, total maglev, based on feedback from 3 eddy current sensors. And so there's no mechanical wear. It'll pump forever. And that is such an efficient way to pump blood. It uses a lot less power. We've seen it in a cow on a treadmill with a cardiac output of 21 to 22 liters a minute.
Almost auto regulation because it can adjust
Right.
if there is a need, right?
And the way it adjusts is that Oreo cookie is in this volute, in this chamber that has inlets and outlets, and it can move a little to the left or a little to the right. Well, the right impeller is these big fingers. Why big fingers? It's got to be clot tolerant. Nobody's made a clot tolerant turbine before. You take a thrombus the size of a raisin and throw it into HeartMate 2 or HeartMate 3 or the ill-fated Heartware or a Micromed or any of those, it'll take the pump out by getting caught, even if it's maglev, because the gaps are so little. This right-sided rotor is designed like the paddle wheel on the back of a riverboat. They designed paddle wheels like that on a riverboat is because you're going over submerged bushes and dunes, sandbars and things, and you can't take it out. So, yeah, clot you throw into this, it just breaks it up and sends it to the lungs.
So this is interesting. Actually, I heard you mention that you might not need anticoagulants
Yeah.
in this type of a scenario just because of those unique properties.
We have to prove that, but yeah, that might be the case. Now, the left impeller is a very low flat thing. Low flat things are very position sensitive, meaning if you move it 300 or 400 microns, less than half a millimeter away from the surface, it pumps a lot less well. If you move it so it's right up against that surface, it becomes a furious pump, a super strong pump. Well, it's monitoring continuously how much energy it's taking to magnetically levitate the rotor. And if it's using a lot, it moves the position of the rotor to where it can use the least amount of energy. We call it virtual zero power. What that means is if your little Oreo cookie with veins on both sides is spinning away and your cardiac output's 10 liters a minute and you're happy, but then suddenly you're eating a Cool Ranch Dorito with hot sauce on it and it goes down the wrong way and you start coughing, with those coughs, your pulmonary vascular resistance acutely goes way up. Blood no longer can make it through the lungs for that couple seconds to the left pump. If the left pump still is pumping furiously, it'll pump all the blood it's got and create a suction event. But as the right pump struggles, because you're coughing a lot, the pressure in the right atrium goes up. The rotor goes, wow, I'm really having to work hard to keep this levitated. Let me move it closer to the magnets on the right. We just made the left pump weaker, which is exactly what you want to do when you're pulmonary vascular. And it's doing that thousands of times a second, better than your heart does, better than my heart does.
Absolutely amazing, amazing technology. So tell us, where are you now as far as BivoCore and human clinical trial is concerned?
Yes, so and getting to human clinical trials was a Herculean effort, like cleaning the Aegean stables. Downstairs in the Texas Heart Institute, we have one, and I probably shouldn't say this on an interview because protesters will come, but we have one of the premier large animal facilities in the world. And all these turbines, all
Large
these very
and small animal, right?
yeah, large and small, but I mean, it's one of the few places where you'll see a cow with an artificial heart jogging on a treadmill. So we did animal after animal after animal with iteration after iteration after iteration of the BivoCore heart. And by the way, the HeartMate 3, the HeartMate 2, the Jarvix, all that stuff was done in that hallowed lab, set up by Dr. Frazier. We had design freeze, which happened about 3 years ago. We started discussions with the FDA and went back and forth about what they needed to see. They agreed that 5 animals for 30 days with histology of the liver, the kidneys, the brain, the lungs, looking at the inside of the pump. And so we started doing that right about the tail of COVID, but we did 5 in a row, made it to 30 days, presented that data. There were some things they saw that they didn't like. We went back and forth. We went back to some of the older animals. We'd done 45 chronic cows over this multi-year period. Finally, they saw everything they needed, and they gave us the nod to do a 5-patient EFS, early feasibility study in the United States. The study was designed just bridge to transplant. They would have the device and they get a transplant. Our ambition is not to be bridge to transplant. Our ambition is to be the world's first permanent artificial heart instead of a transplant, and maybe someday will be preferable to a transplant. But because, there's a big shortage in donor organs. 130,000 people probably die every year in the United States of heart failure. We can transplant 4,500 or so. And the numbers have never been greater for transplant because of donation after cardiac death and organ procurement boxes and whatnot. But anyway, so our study was an early feasibility study. 5 patients. The patients would get the device. They'd have to stay in the ICU until they got transplanted. And these were gravely ill patients with biventricular failure. They had to have right heart failure as well. They couldn't be a candidate for an LVAD. And 4 of the 5 patients had an Impella 5.5 in, and they were dying of right heart failure. The 4 centers that we activated were the Texas Heart Institute, the Christ Hospital in Cincinnati, Banner in Phoenix, Arizona, and Duke. We started in, site activation, getting the clinical trial agreements and stuff, training everybody, again, a monumental task. Each center had 100 people that needed to be trained, anesthesiologists, perfusionists, critical care doctors, surgeons, the OR staff. But that took us till July of 2024, and that's when we started implanting. We did 1 in July, 1 in August, 1 in September, 2 in October, 2 in November, I'm sorry. But in about 4 months, we did all 5 patients.
Amazing.
The first one was at Texas Heart. Second one was at Duke. Third one was at Banner in Arizona. Fourth at Christ, and the fifth again at Texas Heart. Our success was, the device surpassed even our wildest fantasies. That was good and bad. It was bad because every patient was able to be extubated and was up walking in the halls after 3 or 4 days. Some of the patients were walking a mile a day. We had a patient in Banner that did his 6-minute walk on day 12, did 420 meters, which is unheard of. These patients were on their deathbed. Right. The bad thing is they got relisted so quickly and they got transplanted. All patients are alive and well and home with their families. But one of the patients here at the Texas Heart Institute only had the device for 6 days, and the longest we had in the U.S. was 27 days. So while the FDA was reviewing that data, we went to Australia and implanted one November 22nd. That patient actually left the ICU to the step-down unit, and finally we sent him home. And he was home, so from time of his Bivacor till his heart transplant was 104 days. He spent a month and a half at home, changing his dressings, changing his batteries, going to the market, washing his car, living a normal life. No one knew he had an artificial heart.
Amazing.
He did physical therapy. And so now we want to restart in the United States, and we applied to the FDA, and they gave us permission to do 15 more here in the U.S. But we just put in another request to be able to send patients home here in the U.S. so they'd be Unistatus 2. They'd go a lot longer with the device. And the FDA has asked a bunch of questions, and we're going through those maneuvers now to address their concerns. And the concerns they raised were good ones, but ones that we can address. They have to do with electromagnetic safety and some other issues. But so we're really looking forward to getting that behind us. We are in the process of activating 2 more sites, NYU Langone and Columbia Presbyterian, and we have another 30 sites that want to be part of the trial. And before we start our pivotal, which will probably be in mid-2026, and that'll be a pivotal for bridge to transplant. We want to do short and long like they did with the HeartMate 3, but the FDA has said, let's do bridge to transplant first. And we said, okay, that's good. That allows us to start earlier because we don't have to demonstrate as much on biocompatibility.
Right.
We've got 8 pumps in an aquarium in Huntington Beach, California, that I think in another 3 weeks will be 3 years of continuous pumping.
Amazing.
And 2 of the older iterations have been pumped for close to 6 years. So it's going to be durable. It pumps a lot. And as for some of the differences between all the other hearts, other than just no flexible membranes, no valves, much smaller, uses much less energy, pumps a lot higher. For a syncardia, and a syncardia is a brilliant device and has saved a lot of lives, but for it to get up around 8 liters of flow, you got to have the patient really full and have the CVP in the mid-teens. we can do 14 or 15 liters a minute with a CVP of 0. So the transcapillary gradients are like nothing the field has ever seen. And the automaticity of the device. We'll take a patient with a cardiac output of 8 or 9 liters and start him exercising, and it'll go up to 14 liters without us touching controls.
Amazing. In bovine, didn't you go up to 20?
I was there when we had one going 21 liters a minute. Daniel saw one go 23 liters a minute. So the device will pump like crazy.
Amazing. Well, let's briefly mention. You have many areas of interest and research, and just briefly mention what else are you working on at the present time when you're not working on Vivacor?
Well, one of my other favorite companies is this Obvious Robotic, this handheld image-guided device for getting access. We're going after vascular access as our first clinical need. Because
Ultrasound guided, right?
ultrasound guided, and it has a little Bluetooth
Automated.
aiming reticle that you put on, and you push a button, and the brilliance of it is the needle goes back and forth 140 times a second for force reduction. So you know how when you stick something, you're kind of doing this and kind of taking little pokes at it. It's doing that 140 times a second. So you put the crosshairs on something, push a button, and then you see your needle right there, and you advance your guide wire without ever having to put down the ultrasound. And we went to Paraguay and did 17 patients, 18 lines and 17 patients with 100% success, and had novice users use it for the first time, and it worked great. So I'm excited about that. Now I've got this other
I would
company.
call this dummy-proof access.
Right, exactly. That's what we're trying to do, democratize good results.
Right.
Because, I mean, you and I can start a central line like that,
Right.
but out in the community hospitals, they don't have those resources, and the incidence of complications is still prohibitively high, and we think we can have a dramatic impact on that.
Excellent. What else are you working on?
So there's this company that you're intimately involved in, Anaxium, where we're trying to do a device treatment for morbid obesity. And you've been so helpful with that, but it's a device that mimics median arcuate ligament syndrome. It's an implant, as you know, a stent that you put in the proximal abdominal aorta, and you land it so this mesh covers the celiac os, and it slowly occludes, like median arcuate ligament syndrome. So the patient is collateral dependent for their celiac artery, and they should get full really early and get uncomfortable if they eat more than a modest meal. And I think, how many patients have we done now? There were the 2 in Paraguay and 4
last weekend.
4 last weekend. Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, we've done like 8 patients,
Right.
and the weight loss is staggering. Now, this is sort of trying to run into the wind because a lot of people go, hey, in the GLP era, you don't need things for morbid obesity. Well, the GLP have pluses and minuses.
We're learning more and more
We're
about
learning more and more, and this is a one shot and forget it, and it's reversible, as you showed us in the animal lab. We can go up and get a wire across this neointima and balloon them open, and so I'm super excited about that. And then another thing I'm really excited about that's endovascular is this treatment for endoleaks.
Yeah. Tell us about it. That's interesting.
Yeah, and so you know how I said the whole idea of magnetic AV fistulas was
Right.
based on seeing a guy that got stabbed who developed an AV fistula? Well, this whole idea was based on 2 publications, case reports of octogenarians who had big infrarenal abdominal aortic aneurysms, and they had an EVAR, and the EVAR went well, but they had a type 2 endoleak, and it was in an awkward place, and the clinician said, look, this guy's 80 years old. Let's just see what happens. Maybe he'll do okay. Well, the aneurysm, there was endotension from the endoleak. The aneurysm kept expanding while they were trying to decide what to do. In these 2 cases, it ruptured. But in these 2 unusual cases, the inflammation of the expanding aneurysm had stuck it to the cava, and they ruptured into the vena cava. And the aneurysms shrank dramatically over the next 6 weeks.
Venting the aneurysm. Whatever.
Venting the aneurysm.
Like
It is-
Carbol fistula.
Like you are so wise. It is just like a Cabral fistula. It is just like let them bleed into their venous system. So we've developed a self-expanding nitinol pop rivet that rolls up and foreshortens and brings the sac to the cava. And unfortunately, there's no good animal model for infrarenal abdominal aortic aneurysms. So we've created one where we're ligating the aorta right below the renals and right above the iliac quadrification. The pigs, it sort of splits into four. And having these back bleeding lumbars drain into the cava of this isolated segment through a stent, and it stays open, and the pressure and tension in this isolated segment goes way down. And so we think, unfortunately, I think we're first going to have to show that you can treat problematic endoleaks, but someday this may be a preemptive procedure because endoleaks are pretty common. And if you always put one of these in from the aneurysm sac to the cava after an EVAR, then the whole field of endoleaks disappears maybe. Maybe. A lot of people say, what about this, what about that, what about this, what about that? And I go, yeah, it's unknown. We have to do the experiments, we have to see.
Exciting project. I'm also very much interested in working with you on this project. Tell us a little bit about what are the key factors for success in research and in innovations, and you've been involved in this for several decades, if not more.
Yeah, so I have three. First of all, surround yourself with the right people. With the right team, you can do anything. With the wrong team, you're doomed, no matter how great your idea is. So it's all about people. It's all about finding people that have the right work ethic, that don't fall in love with their own ideas, that can pivot, that listen, have big ears, and are domain masters and have the right energy and enthusiasm. The second one is perseverance. As you know probably better than I do, everything hard takes effort, and it's almost like a boat tacking against the wind, trying to cross a lake. And sometimes you're heading, you go, we want to go that way. And then you're going, we want to go that way. But then when you get to the other shore, you look and you see this zigzag line and realize you were heading to your destination the whole time. So you can't get frustrated. You got to be a bit of a cheerleader and a psychotherapist to keep the team motivated because things don't always go well. And persevere. And just if you know in your gut that it's going to work, don't let anybody, any gray-haired person dissuade you. Only person that should ever completely dissuade you is Mother Nature. And if Mother Nature says this isn't going to work, you got to internalize and say, it's not going to work the way we're doing it. And I can't think of a better way. I'm going to put it on a shelf for a while until I have another eureka on it. So perseverance. And then take action. Everybody's got ideas in their head floating around, or why couldn't we, or why don't we do it. Go make a prototype or find somebody who will make a prototype for you. People say, well, I'm busy with this, I'm busy with that. Well, then you really don't want to be an innovator, because if you really wanted to, you would do something on it right now instead of talking to me about it. Because the first steps of every innovative process are like the first thing in an avalanche. It can be a little grain of sand. Do something. Go on the internet and read, talk to people. Make a goofy prototype. People go, well, I don't want to make a prototype. I'm not an engineer. Everybody is an engineer. And if you make a prototype that's just laughably goofy, well, don't show it to anybody. Just play with it for a while and then make it again and make it again. And after 5 or 6 times, you'll go, this is pretty cool. I'm going to start showing this to people. You can't be afraid to take a first step, because without the first step, nothing ever happens. So take the first step, be perseverant, surround yourself with brilliant people.
It is so true. You have to be a leader, not a follower.
Yeah.
Exactly.
When you're trying to get people to follow you into the fire, you got to go, it's not that hot. Come on, let's go.
So much is known about your skills, your inventions, and all the achievements in the field of cardiovascular surgery and medicine in general. But not everybody knows about your other areas of interest. And I know personally, I have experienced that.
I knew you were going to go here.
You are a great musician as well. Tell us a little bit about how did you get involved in music and what you do with music.
I think it's a continuation of the same thing. It's wanting to make something and to make something new and beautiful and work out the details. So I think my passion in music, and by the way, I played last night
The turbines?
No, I played my horn at Dan Electro's Guitar Bar. I got up for an open jam.
Oh, really?
But yeah, I should do that more. But I think it's the creative process and the creative drive and the thing that the idea that you've got this thing in your hand and you can get there with other people that have learned to do their stuff and make something that's beautiful and wonderful and that people appreciate. That's what medical technology is. You're trying to help people and do something productive. It's a very similar sort of thing.
And another thing is that I have experienced and I've seen you perform many times is magic.
Yeah.
You are amazing
Well, thank
magician.
you.
I mean, Las Vegas is.
I really am a great
definitely-
magician. Anybody watching this, I'm a killer magician. And that's something I work on most days. I worked on it some early this morning. But that, I think, ties in with the heart surgery. Just being able to get all the steps just right.
Perfection.
Yeah, perfection. I remember Robbie Johnson, who was one of my mentors at the BI Deaconess, this brilliant, funny, talented surgeon. And we were talking about coronary bypass, and he goes, yeah, when I do one of them perfectly, I'll retire. There's just so many little steps and so many,
Right.
Although Denton Cooley, you'd watch him operate and go,
Right.
damn. But it's just chasing that perfection, chasing that just everything went just right, because there's 1,000 little moves in every operation, 1,000 little moves in every magic trick. And if one of them's not quite right, some of the people go, oh,
Yeah.
I see. So anyway.
Well, Billy, this has been a tremendous podcast recording of all the things that you have achieved in your life. And all of us admire you, that know you real well in all your areas of expertise. Thank you once again to be part of it.
Well, you're very
It's a
generous
privilege.
in your praise, and thank you for letting me be part of this. It's like I said, I kind of look at the list of people and go, I probably don't deserve to be on this list. But one last thing is that innovation is a lot like playing a musical instrument. You got to spend time on it, and making things that work is a product of making tons of things that don't work, and you got to just keep going at it. So any would-be innovators out there, you say, oh, I want to be an innovator. How do you do it? The answer is start innovating just every day. It doesn't magically happen. It happens because you spend time and bandwidth and effort on it, and just be thinking of it all the time and playing with it all the time, and it's not that hard.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity.